So we're gonna do things a little differently today. I don't discuss a whole lot of manga on this channel, mainly because I haven't read a whole lot of manga since I really got into anime and manga years back, but there's a certain series that I come back to once, twice, the odd time 3 times a year, and it's not a tale that I go back to re-experience because it makes me happy or I feel good when I conclude it. In fact, it's the only series next to Welcome to the NHK that when I finish the anime or I finish its source material, I just leave feeling empty. It's a very depressing feeling, and a lot of people come to entertainment media, things like that, to feel happy, to feel like they're experiencing something they could experience in the real world, but they don't want to feel depressed. Where me, being the cold bastard that I am, I want stories to mess me up. And No Longer Human is a very, very depressing series. It was originally a novel that has spawned anime, live action, I believe there's live action to it, and multiple manga adaptations, and the one I'm going to be discussing today is actually the first, but also I believe it's completely out of print. So if you were to want to pick up this 3-volume series, good luck because you're gonna have to buy it used and usually selling for about $100 a volume. And I don't believe there's any way even illegally to just, easily go to a Hsieh site and read it online. You're gonna have to really do some digging. So I did question, should I even make this video, because the likelihood of anyone having read the manga in question, as I believe it was released between 2009 and 2011, yes, there's newer versions of this story, but I don't think they compare to this, what I consider to be a modern classic, as it's very, very similar to the novel from what I'm remembering. The novel I haven't read in years, the manga I reread a couple of times a year at best, and I just feel like this is a story that I've always wanted to at least discuss in some form, and I figured after my latest rereading, I figured why not. And just to show you basically what this series is, it's actually one of my favorite transitions for manga covers because it starts off just like this, normal guy, you think, okay, everything's okay. You then transition to volume 2, and you start thinking, man, this guy's life, it must be getting pretty bad after seeing he looked like a normal high school student. By volume 3, the dude looks like a maniac, and that perfectly represents the transition of this story, and it is utterly fantastic. I'm obviously going into spoilers, so if you want to try to hunt down the story, good luck. I would recommend, if you want to experience it and you never have, your best bet is to get the novel. It's on Amazon, it's on any site if you want to buy it legally, and even if you want to sail the high seas, it's pretty easy to come by, unlike this manga. And for that reason, I'm not going to be able to do images and things like that just because I don't have a scanner, so I don't really have accessible ways to get screen caps and things like that, just because it is so hard to find. I guess because there's been so many extra manga that have come out after this that have done their own retelling of this classic story, they figured they don't need to reprint it, which is a damn shame because this is one of the best stories ever made. I'd go as far as say, if I was to make a top 10 list of just across all media, this series would be in my favorites. That's how much I like it. So I'm obviously going to touch into spoilers. If you don't care, obviously carry on with this video, but just to give you a bit of a warning, because I am going to go into massive spoilers, because this is a series that it just takes you on such a ride. The series is basically about Oba, this guy who is just, he's perfect. He feels like he meshes in with any situation, whether it's the jocks, the geeks, whatever he needs to fit in with. He feels like a puppet, that everyone's pulling his strings and he gets by. People always think he's handsome, he's charming, he's funny, he's the class clown. But all his life, he's never wanted to be that. When he was a young kid, one of his father's servants molested him. He was just so abused, but why would he say anything? Because it wouldn't do any good. He's just someone who always got by in life and felt okay with that. And there comes a point where he eventually stops going to school. He stops basically supporting this fake image of himself. And what I've always liked about No Longer Human is how there's a relatable element to this guy who becomes completely unrelatable because most people who are going to pick up this story haven't spiraled down to maximum failure like he does by the end of the series. But the idea of just feeling like a puppet and having to fake a smile or fake your identity to fit in with society and fearing the future as an adult is an incredibly relatable motive. And that's what I think makes this so frightening, is that it kind of feels like it could happen to anyone just if their life went down a slightly different path, and you fear maybe your life could still go down such a tragic path. And the whole idea that he slowly gets roped into just, he experiences hookers, he experiences alcohol and drug abuse. It's just this absolute madness that by the end of the first volume, you basically experience him actually start to care for someone. The entire point of this story is representing how he just manipulates anyone. He knows he's good looking, so females will just fall into his lap. If he needs money, if he needs a place to stay, he knows how to make it look like he's a lost puppy and they'll naturally take him home, which then in result leads to sex and just manipulation. But by the end of the first volume, he tries to do a double suicide because eventually his funds get cut off by his family. He basically abandoned his father and his brother. He wanted to live alone. And there comes a point where his father says enough is enough because you're not going to school, so I'm not going to support you any longer. And he eventually, with someone who he slept with, just decides that it's time for a double suicide. And unfortunately for him, because life just hates him, she dies and he lives, which then in result makes him look like he murdered her because it was a girl he slept with for a couple of times, she bought him food and gave him money. It just looks absolutely scummy for him. And the transition from this point onwards is where I feel like it loses its relatable charm, but makes you fear that anyone could end up in his situation. That's what I love about No Longer Human, is how it starts off with a feeling that I can totally relate with, where even throughout my own school life, I was very good at naturally bouncing from group to group and not really getting all that pushed around once I kind of flipped a switch and just realized that it was very easy to manipulate my way through life. And that's what makes this story so painful to me, is that once you get into volume 2, the middle part of this story, it's insane. He finds a reason to live eventually because he truly loved this girl and wanted to die with her because they were done with life. They were fed up, and they kind of directed as this like Romeo and Juliet romantic scene. And then he finds purpose as if, wait, maybe I'm being punished and this will be my purpose to live, to make it up to this girl who I loved because now I'm alive. But then the charges get dropped because his father has a lot of political power. And that in return messes him up even more because the one thing giving him purpose again to live is now ripped away once again by his father and his money. The whole point of this story is about like society and money and how it just corrupts you and just manipulates you, and just every step of the way that this man starts to find peace, it gets stripped away from him, either because of external forces or his own actions. This man is just a totally tragic character, and I love what ultimately happens where he starts actually finding a purpose in life. He starts becoming a mangaka. He starts drawing children's manga after he gets roped in with basically his friend's assistant who already has a child, and basically he starts having a family life. She considers him papa. He has a woman that you would think he would care for, but he doesn't. The only reason he stays with this woman is because she has money and she feeds him, and she understands this, but she is lonely herself, so she accepts him and says, even if you don't love me, I love you. And it just starts becoming like, okay, even though this is toxic, at the very least, he's not doing a double suicide. And then there comes a point where he just abandons them so easily, lives with a bartender who is much older than himself. It never gets sexual, it's more of a weird friendship that he sometimes draws her nude. And then ultimately, he finds someone he actually loves. And this is where it gets insane. All this story is watching just a mind shatter more and more, and then sometimes find peace of mind. He actually gets married. He gets married to this girl who it's like this child innocence. He just keeps going to this one store multiple times a day to buy smokes, and he's always drunk, and she worries for him, and then eventually he gives up on it and they get married. It's just like this spontaneous marriage, and naturally you would think, wow, that's gonna be failure, but for a year they have like a blissful marriage. Like, they're not wealthy, he has his manga work, she helps him, but ultimately they feel like a happy couple. And it's like, that's where most stories like this would go. It would actually say, okay, he had a lot of hardships. There's all this prostitution, there's this alcohol abuse, there's sometimes drug abuse, there's physical and emotional abuse, double suicide, being charged for murder, and then your father getting you out of it, which in result messes your mind up even more. But what they ultimately do is they don't let him have a happy ending. What happens in this story is there comes a point where the assistant or the person who comes by to collect the manga, right? He gets fired from his job, comes in drunk, and rapes his wife. And in return, that breaks him so much that he has to rely on drugs. He basically gets manipulated by a drug dealer who acts like he's there for him, being like, man, your life is so bad, I have something that's going to let you feel better, and he starts doing speed, and the transition from this loving relationship to her feeling like she's being blamed for what happened to her. But he doesn't blame her, he more or less blames society, but he doesn't know how to deal with his emotions because he's such an emotionally broken person that his manga creations just go completely out the window. He gets canned, and then it comes to the point that he just becomes so lost and isolated that her father comes in, strips him away, and he's just left for dead. And the best part of this story is that, for the manga, is that basically it's told from someone who's reading up on this guy's journal. He basically wants inspiration for his next manga, and he stumbles across this journal, and it feels, up and down like, oh, this can't be real, and then, oh, of course, he's getting a happy ending. But by the end of the story, this man stumbles across Oba, because he actually is just so engrossed with his tale that he finds the man just sitting in trash. But then he thinks this can't actually be him, because there's no way that this 25-year-old, or however old he is, could look so old and gross. And then he walks away, and the end of the manga is basically him just feeling like he's found this eternal peace, but he hasn't. The entire point of this story is just to showcase how easy it is for someone to get lost in life and be so destroyed and broken and isolated, and just how anyone could go down his path. And yes, he's a bad person for a lot of what he does. He manipulates so many women just so he could eat or get a laptop or, live with a family and make them think that he's actually going to play the father role into then just abandoning them like it's nothing. It's so easy for this man to manipulate, but on the other hand, you realize what a tragic mind he's had and how he really needed counseling all his life, and if maybe he got it when he was a teenager, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But I think the reason I always come back to this story is that there comes a point where no matter how much hardship happens, he found a wife, he found something and a career that was actually giving him purpose, and then some scumball raped his wife, and it broke his mind that he couldn't recover. And it wasn't like he was trying to blame her, but ultimately he didn't know how to deal with this, and every time he tried to be a better person, he got roped into more shady things, and alcohol and drug abuse just completely wiped him. There comes a point in the story that literally after this moment, that his hair turns gray overnight. That's how messed up and empty he becomes, and slowly but surely, he looks like an old man at the young age of like 23. This story is depressing, and it messes me up. There is something so beautiful about a tragic story, something that's not trying to tell you something happy and, you're always thinking it's gonna be okay, but rather something that just highlights the brutality of life. This isn't something you read on your darkest days. You make sure you're in a pretty positive mood, because by the time you leave volume 3 or you wrap up the novel, you're gonna feel kind of empty, or at least that's how I felt, which is the exact same feeling I get with a series called Welcome to the NHK, which just leaves me utterly depressed and empty, but I keep coming back to it because I love to be hurt, I guess. No Longer Human is just a classic for a reason, and it spawns so many just different mangas or, interpretations of this story because it's so good. Because you can't compare it to many works out there. It's something that is trying to make you feel disgusting, as if, you're touching and reading something that you should just throw away. You shouldn't experience this because it is trying to highlight the brutality of humanity, but it does it so elegantly that you can't look away. This manga version as well has some amazing imagery. I love it when they really shatter his mind, or when they go sexual or just more mundane, making it feel like he's normal, but then you'll have his internal thoughts and it is just so corrupt and twisted. This story is so good that it is a damn shame that it's not more accessible, because it's amazing. Yes, you can easily read the novel, and I highly recommend it because it's a good version in itself, but, this manga right here, this version is so goddamn good, and I don't know why it's not more accessible. Maybe in certain countries it will be, maybe it's not at a print in some places, but for me it is. But just, it is such a good story, and I want to show you. Like, this is literally the final page. The final page is the dimensional ascent begins, and a 23-year-old looks like he's an old man laying in garbage. That's how this man's life ends. He starts off as the perfect high school student to just transition into madness and chaos. And it's not even like there's a message to the story of like, life's gonna get better or this could happen to anyone. It's just, this is something that happened to this man, and this is how bad it got for him. And at every step of the way, there's multiple points where you feel like his life's getting better, And yes, he made a lot of bad decisions himself, but there's some decisions that happen and just actions that occur to people he cares about that he can't do anything. He has his best friend in this story who just is constantly envious of what he has. And when his wife is getting raped, he comes to get him to show him rather than stopping the action because he just wants this guy to suffer, right? It's complete chaos. I love this story so much, and I can just think about it for hours and days on end. And I think that's why I come back to it so often, because it is something that represents the brutality and the toxicity of humanity in such a way that I can't compare it to any other story that I've experienced. Because a lot of times, you focus on the good, but all the good in this series, it gets manipulated or is shattered by either Oba or people trying to hurt Oba, right? And that's what's so painful about this. And I don't know, if you can find this version of the manga online, I highly recommend it. There is other versions. I think 2 different manga series have come out since this release. However, I recommend this one or the novel the most. I've read and experienced pretty much everything No Longer Human. It's such a good story that even the worst versions of it I'm willing to just consume because it's such an amazing story. But if you can't find this manga, I recommend getting the novel. I don't care if you do it illegally or legally, just at least experience the novel because it is so goddamn good, and it is the closest version to this, as this is an adaptation of the original source material. But for everything that I said, the closest that you're gonna get if you can't find this manga is the novel. It is so goddamn good, and you'll rarely hear me hyping up manga on this channel, but this one, I will continue to hype up probably until this channel is dead. That's how much I goddamn love it. But that's all for this video. It's a bit different. I know I couldn't edit it as much as I do with my other videos because it's not accessible online, so I couldn't get images and whatnot, but I needed to hype this up. I've experienced this story so many times that after my latest reread last night, I was like, you know what, it's time for a video on No Longer Human. I doubt this will get many views or many people will give a shit about it, but I make videos for me and I really want to discuss No Longer Human. But for anyone who may have any thoughts on No Longer Human or this video, do let me know yours down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed my ramblings, which they definitely were ramblings this week, drop a like and also hit that subscribe button if you have been new around here. So until next time everyone, please take care and have a good one.